they've given a lot of kit to the Russians recently, which, I think on this program I mentioned, I thought was a strategic mistake a couple of weeks ago. I think is, even more of a mistake now. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former British Army officer and military analyst. It's been a pretty extraordinary few days and weeks building up to the Iranian missile attack on Israel tonight, precipitated by the extraordinary, audacious Israeli attack on Hezbollah. First of all, with the pagers, then the push-to-talk radios, then taking out key commanders, and of course the leader Hassan Nasrallah, along with some of his supporting staff. And in the last 24 hours, I wouldn't say it's an Israeli invasion into southern Lebanon, but certainly incursion to try and secure that border. We have, or the Israelis, everybody has been anticipating the Iranian reaction. Iran has been humiliated in the last 2 weeks. The last time there was a significant attack by Iran on Israel back in April, we got 2 or 3 days' notice. And that was enough time for the Americans and allies, including the Brits, to put additional air defense in place to protect Israel. In this case, earlier on today, I think the US State Department were warning that it was expecting attacks from Iran into Israel. And then in the last hour or so, that has now come to fruition. And we understand that the Iranians are firing ballistic missiles. These are slightly different from what they fired in April, very fast-moving missiles, which are more difficult to take down. The latest figures seem to be, and it's very difficult to get accurate ones, potentially 160 or so of these missiles have been fired at Israel. And whether the US is involved in the air defense and even the UK, one doesn't know yet. Pictures coming out of Israel over Tel Aviv and elsewhere would appear to suggest that Israeli's Iron Dome, which is their air defense system, is working at full power and full tilt. And we're seeing what appears to be most of the missiles coming in being hit at in the sky. Whether there are casualties, again, it's a bit too early to say. Sadly, one would anticipate there will be, because even if the missiles don't detonate on the ground, falling debris and everything else, I think this is a really, it is obviously a very dangerous time, but Iran, I think, is taking a heck of a risk here. Sure, they've been humiliated, their proxies, particularly Hezbollah and the Houthis down in Yemen, have been devastated by the Israelis. But hitherto they've stood back. It is clear, and Netanyahu has been saying this over the last few days, that Israel would respond to this sort of attack. And Israel, although a much smaller country than Iran, has a much more capable military potential response. And we shall see with that. And underwriting this all, Israel is a nuclear nation and Iran is not. Now, I'm not suggesting, I don't think anybody's suggesting that Israel will go that far, but this is what the Ayatollahs in Tehran are playing with. Let's hope it will be similar to the April time when 90%, 95% of the Iranian missiles were intercepted and knocked down. And in response, Israel fired one missile at Isfahan, at some of the nuclear research facilities, and they got through and hit them, and that was the end of the matter. So the next 24 hours or so are going to be pretty tense to see really how Israel reacts and to find out what the civilian casualty and collateral damage Iran has caused. And we're all hoping that it is minimal, because no doubt the more damage that's caused, the more violent the Israeli response will be. What we understand, its ballistic missiles have been fired from Iran. These travel at thousands of miles an hour in the high atmosphere, very at great speed, and then and should be precision guided to hit various targets in Israel. Now, Israel's Iron Dome, a lot of it is still confidential, but basically, as it sounds, they have a bunch of ground-based missiles that fire and intercept these ballistic missiles. the faster they're going and the more of them, the more difficult it is to take them out. And I think Israeli military commanders have said today that the Iron Dome, is not completely fail-safe. It's been developed over many years. It's incredibly effective and is almost unique around the world. But it has a certain level of capacity. At the moment, it seems to be holding, which is why it really depends how much more the Iranians attack it. When it comes to the attacks back in April, when Iran fired a lot of fairly slow-moving drones, they were relatively easy for US and British fighter aircraft to take them out of the sky well before they got to Israel. So, yeah, when something's moving quickly, it is more challenging to take it down. But the Iron Dome is very sophisticated and very well proven thus far. The trigger point is the attacks on Hezbollah, no doubt, and the incursion into southern Lebanon, and the fact that Iran and Hezbollah have been humiliated. The Ayatollahs in Tehran are behind all this. They run these terror groups, and Israel has always been their avowed enemy. So it would be a real surprise if they didn't. Now, we don't know the full extent of the attack yet. We think it's 100 plus ballistic missiles. Whether it's going to be any more than that, we shall just have to wait and see. There is not an awful lot they can do. We know that their proxies in Syria have been hit recently. So the extent, we will just have to wait and see. Unlike the last time in April, at least then Iran did signal for 2 or 3 days they were going to do this. This time it has been much shorter. So we're not entirely sure. And, we might be the beginning of a very long night. Who knows? We just need to see how it unfolds. But whatever happens, Tehran will now very much be in the sights of Netanyahu and the Israelis, who can probably hit Iran much harder than Iran can hit Israel. It's symbolic because the Iranians had to do it. Their other option was to capitulate, and Iran, is the leader of these terror groups in the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. So, they obviously felt duty bound. It is their proxies, if you like, their terror groups who have been decimated. So that is why they've had to, they feel they must act because, the Ayatollahs and the so-called government in Iran, absolutely depends on that. They have been ordering Hezbollah and Hamas and others to attack Israel. So it is, they obviously see it. They want to avoid strategic defeat. They have been tactically defeated certainly in various areas in the Middle East, in Lebanon, and areas of Israel. And it is hugely symbolic for them. So that is why they've had to respond. It's a question of how much more they can do. I think they are limited because they've relied on terror groups like Hezbollah to do their business. Actually, they've sort of forgotten about their own conventional defense. And we know they've given a lot of kit to the Russians recently, which, I think on this program I mentioned, I thought was a strategic mistake a couple of weeks ago. I think is, even more of a mistake now. So although they do have a lot of capability, ultimately, I think it all goes back to the fact that, Israel does have the capacity and potential to hit Iran much harder than Iran can hit Israel, which is why, the next 24 hours or so are going to be pivotal to see how this goes. If it keeps escalating and Iran keeps firing, and Israel reacts with much greater capacity, then that could bring in a whole bunch of other regional players as well. No doubt, and we understand that the US the president, the vice president, are monitoring this very closely, and no doubt will be doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try and limit the scale of this attack and the response. It is potential the West might well intervene. The Americans and ourselves already intervened in April when the Iranians last fired missiles at Israel. America has again reiterated today that it will protect Israel and it is closest ally. So, yeah, I think there is a potential, but I think everybody in the West wants to make sure that this doesn't escalate. And all the time, no doubt, Putin is looking on with some pleasure, and mustn't take our eyes off Ukraine because while everybody is looking at Israel and Iran, Russia could very well step up its operations there too. So, yeah, it is a challenging time at the moment around the world.